And pray for me as we go along, because I'm a little nervous about that one, because that's an important slide, or an important part of the presentation. Last time we talked about how does the ark point to Jesus Christ, and that takes us up to, let's have a prayer before we get started too. Father in heaven, I come to you tonight, I'm just overjoyed and thankful for the opportunity you've given me to be entrusted with a portion of your word and share it with your children. It's a tremendous responsibility that I don't take lightly, and I thank you for being with me and walking with me through that journey. It's been a wonderful blessing to me, and I pray that as we finish up tonight, I'll be able to shed light on your beloved Son and help people to understand how this story sheds light on his gospel and on the work he did for us. It's in Jesus Christ's precious name. Amen. So the next part of the narrative here, we're up to the Noah covenant. Noahic. That covenant right there.
The covenant of Noah?
Yeah. That's covered in Genesis chapter 6. Let's read that one. We don't read everything because it'd take all night, but chapter 6, verse 17 and 18. It says, "And behold, I, even I," this is God talking, "do bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. But with thee I will establish my covenant, and thou shalt come into the ark, thou and thy sons and thy wife and thy sons' wives with thee." The God that we serve is a God of promises. There's promises throughout the Word of God. They're beautiful promises, every single one of them. This is just one of the ones we're going to talk about here. This is the first place the word covenant is used in the Bible, but is it the first covenant? Anybody? No, it's not the first covenant. There's the Adamant Covenant that is in, is it chapter 1? It's either in chapter 1 or 2. It's during the creation narrative, the Adamant Covenant. So what is that? That's a conditional covenant that says, if you are obedient to me, I will walk in your presence, and you'll enjoy the beautiful garden and my creation and my fellowship. God to Adam and Eve. But then they sinned, and next comes the Adamic Covenant. That's an unconditional covenant, and it's also a unilateral covenant. God says, now I will curse man, woman, the serpent, and the world. And of course, Adam doesn't have to do anything to participate. This is God's doing. So it's unconditional and unilateral. And then the Noah covenant says, I will no longer destroy the world with a flood. And it's unconditional. Noah has to do nothing at this point. It's a promise to Noah and all of mankind. Unconditional. We have to do nothing. There's a few others that come after that. The Abrahamic Covenant, that was his promise to Abraham that he will be the father of a great nation that will bless every nation in the world. And the symbol of that will be circumcision. And there's one other note that I had on that. Anyway, that's the Abrahamic Covenant. That was a unilateral covenant. Why was that one unilateral? If you remember back to, if you've read that narrative before, if you heard the story before, or recently, enough to remember anyway, God had Abraham, bring three animals? I think it was 3 animals, cut them in half. God passed between the animals. Abraham didn't. It's all God's work. This is unconditional, unilateral. Everything's on God's shoulders. The Mosaic Covenant was the law that Moses got when he went up the mountain. He got the law, and that was a covenant with the people of Israel. That covenant was never with us. It was with Israel. There's the land covenant when God divided, or when Israel divided up the land between the 12 tribes. God made a promise: if you're obedient, you will possess the land. And they were obedient at times, and they did possess the land. They were very disobedient, and they were hauled away and held captivity a couple of times. There was a Davidic covenant that said that I'll establish by your seed I will establish a kingdom that will be forever. And of course, he did that through Jesus Christ. And then, of course, the new covenant. That's the one we're under now. The new covenant was prophesied. This, in Jeremiah 31:31, he said, "Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah." So basically everybody, right? It's with everybody. Jesus, in his own words in the book of John, gave us a nutshell synopsis of what the new covenant is. Believe on me, everlasting life. That's pretty basic, and that's pretty much the whole thing right there. Believe on me, everlasting life. That's the covenant that we're under now. Anyway, several covenants. There's others in the Bibles, but our God's a God of promises. There's a bunch of them in there. Now we're up to the part where the animals show up. In Genesis chapter 6, verse 19 through 21, it says, 2 of every animal will come, and take food for your family, food for the animals, and put all that on the ark, and 2 of every kind of animal will come. That brings up a couple of questions to me. The first one, and this is one of the areas that the anti-Christian folks who want to attack this narrative and the creation narrative, this is one of the areas they attack. They say there's no way all these animals would fit on that ark, right? Have you ever heard that argument before? And I'm not really smart enough to refute that argument, but I've done a lot of study lately about it, of course, as I prepared for this class. And one of the best sources is Ken Ham, which is the founder of the Ark Encounter. There you go. I was going to say Ark Park. The Ark Park and the Creation Museum. But the way he lays it out, it's pretty. I watched a video, where he was addressing that question. How did all those animals fit on the ark? And basically, what he said is most of the animals in the world are about the size of a sheep or smaller. So you didn't need as much space as you first think. I know there's elephants and giraffes, and like every picture of an ark ever drawn has giraffe heads sticking up out of it. But there's not really that many animals that were that big. There's not as many animals as you think they are. And juvenile animals take up less space than the adults do. And for example, with canines, I'll just use canines or dogs for an example. That made me think of a funny line from a movie, but dogs. But anyway, canines. He didn't have to take 2 Chihuahuas and 2 Rottweilers and 2 wolves. He took 2 dogs. And built into the DNA of every living creature on earth is genetic diversity that allows the Lord to take those 2 dogs, and as they produce and repopulate the world, you get all the different breeds that come from that. Brilliant. I wouldn't have been able to figure that out on my own. I could, but what an amazing God we serve. That you just take, I don't know what kind of dogs they were, probably pretty small ones that won't bite them when they try to feed them. I don't know, but these 2 dogs, and we get all of this. 2 horses, and we get all these different kinds, and 2 chickens. It's amazing. So it probably didn't take. How many animals were there? I don't know. If somebody tries to tell you they know how many animals there were, just smile and wave. They don't know either. And the second question that I've seen addressed on this, which I find a little bit fascinating, is how did God get all those animals to that ark? And there's been some pretty bizarre theories on that one, and some pretty bizarre arguments against the global flood on that one. But keep in mind, there was only one continent, so Chihuahuas did not have to cross the Bering Sea to get over to the ark. So, that's not a concern. There's only one. So they just had to walk there. From wherever they live, they had to walk there. Keep that in mind. So how do you get all the animals to the ark? Well, one thing that comes to mind for the dogs, all you got to do is go, "Here, boy, let's go." And they'll run, jump on the ark, and stick their head out the window, and they're ready to go. For the rest of the animals, I don't know. But one thing that was fascinating to me, this guy did a research project on a earthquake they had recently, I don't know, within the last 10, 15 years, whatever, in San Francisco. And one thing he noticed was right before the earthquake, there was a tremendous increase in the number of missing pets because the animals can sense the impending danger. You know, where you put the picture of your cat on the telephone pole, and probably if we had Facebook back then, I don't know how long ago it was, but so some of the trouble for the earth that was brewing underground with all these volcanoes and earthquakes that were coming soon, that I'm getting ready to talk about on a future slide here, the animals could sense that perhaps. Maybe he used that to his advantage. I don't know. He could have just said, you go to the ark, you go to the ark. I mean, he could have, however, I don't know. Is it important? It's fascinating, but not important. So what was the food? I don't really know. I've seen a lot of speculation that people were vegetarians before the flood. After the flood, God says, subdue and eat all the animals. But before the flood, I see no evidence of that. So were they vegetarians? Probably, but I don't know. Somebody asked me the other night, well, what did they eat? I don't really know. I know Noah took 7 of every clean animal, and at first I thought that was for food. But then again, I don't see any evidence of telling people to eat animals until after the flood. So I don't really know. I know the amount of food that you would have to take on the ark would be tremendous, but one thought that occurred to me, and this is just my little peanut brain and how it works, God could easily tell, Dennis preached on this just this Sunday, God can speak into existence that which doesn't exist. So you could easily put all those animals and people on a diet for the 1 year that they're going to be on the ark. Could he not do that? He could easily do that, and maybe he did.
About that myself when you're working on this, but God could easily slow the metabolism down.
Right. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't.
Well, they probably slept a lot, so when they sleep a lot, they're resting.
Right. I don't think you had to cage the lions so they don't eat the sheep and stuff. I don't think all that was going on. I think God arranged it for him. He just didn't see fit to. We don't need to bog down on those facts, so let's move on, right? What else did I? Oh, and Noah thus did Noah according to all that God commanded him. So did he. That statement is in there a few times, and I'll address that a little bit more in depth when it shows up here pretty soon. So now we're finally up to chapter 7. We got a whole chapter done. And what is this, the third night already? And we've got a whole chapter done. But it'll move a lot faster through chapter 7 and 8. Chapter 7, verse 1, and the Lord said to Noah, come thou and all thy house into the ark, for in thee have I seen righteousness before me in this generation. Just about every story I've read, every video I've watched, every sermon I've heard, everybody always says God commanded Noah into the ark. But I beg the question, did he command Noah into the ark? Because that's not really God's style. What else has God commanded people to do? I mean, he gave us laws, but he also gives us free will. I think he invited Noah into the ark. That's just my opinion. If you don't agree with that, I'll be glad to discuss it with you after the fact, and you might be able to change my mind, but I think that God invited Noah. I know it says commanded in the text, but this is an English translation too. Remember, it's been changed language several times. Any thoughts on that? I mean, am I way out? Does everybody...
I'm saying he probably told him, he said, okay, it's time to get on.
Yeah, he told him to get on, but he could have said, I ain't getting on that thing.
Yeah,
I know who built it. I ain't getting on there. I don't know. Maybe he would have sent a fish to eat him and hold him in his belly for 3 days if he didn't. I don't know. What would he have done? That's my personal feeling. God's not, he doesn't usually override our free will. We have the will to obey him or to not obey him.
Well, he'd already obeyed.
He'd already obeyed. He built the ark.
Yeah, I mean, that was just another step in the process of following God's word.
Yeah. he knew God was serious, and God knew he was serious. So they both knew this was going to work out, but I don't know. I like the word invitation better than a command. I don't know.
Hebrew word is translated sometimes, mostly 430 times it's translated as command, but there's 3 times where it's translated as vague, which would be kind of like invite.
Yeah.
So it's not such a firm word that it can only be taken one way.
I appreciate you pointing that out. I should have looked that up. So after he tells Noah to go, it's time to get in the ark, whether it's a command or an invitation. He briefs Noah on what's going to happen, or what else to do. Take clean animals by 7s, unclean animals by 2s, birds by 7, and then in 7 days it's going to start to rain. That's his briefing to Noah. That's what's about to happen. The next verse, 5, and Noah did according to all that the Lord commanded him. Once again, there's that statement of faith by Noah. And what I want to point out, and I don't want to get bogged down too long because I want to make sure I get to the end of this here tonight, but I want to look at what Noah accomplished by faith, and compared to what we can accomplish by faith, and what the Bible tells some of the other people accomplished by faith. In the book of Hebrews, if you want to turn, chapter 11 and verse 7. What's that? Oh, is it? Very good. It says, by faith, Noah, being warned of God of things not seen as yet. In other words, and nobody's ever seen it rain before, and so forth. Moved with fear, prepared an ark to what? The saving of his house, by which he condemned the world and became the heir of righteousness, which is by faith. That's what Noah, by Noah's faith, and I've said this once already, I think Noah is one of the finest examples of faith in the entire Bible. There's some other great ones in there, but Noah's the only one where we don't get any negative. He didn't mess anything up. Or he probably did, but we just don't get it in the narrative. We all mess up. Make no mistake about that. But look what he accomplished. He saved his family by faith. He condemned the world. God did that, really, but he became the heir of righteousness, and he did all that by faith. Let's look at another verse in Hebrew and see what some of the other what the Bible says, what the author of Hebrews says in chapter 11, verses 32 through 5, about some of the other people and what they accomplished by faith. This is an amazing passage, if you ask me. And what shall I say more? Or I think Paul is, most people accept Paul as the author. He had just been talking about some of the other titans of faith, and then he goes on, is that what he means by that. And what shall I say more? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon, and of Barak, and of Samson, and of Jephthah, and of David also, and Samuel, and of the prophets who, through faith, subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness was made strong, waxed valiant in fight, turned to fight the armies of the aliens, and women received their dead raised to life again, and others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might what? Obtain a better resurrection. Obtain a better resurrection. Such an amazing list of accomplishments that the Bible lines out for us that Noah accomplished, that others accomplished, but it's those last few words there is what we're trying to accomplish by our faith, to obtain a better, I can't say it, but hopefully I can do it, obtain a better resurrection. That's what we hope to accomplish by faith when Jesus Christ comes back, unless I'm alive, which would be cool to see. That would be so cool. Does anybody in here disagree with that? No, of course not. But if I'm not, if it happens after I am asleep with the fathers, I'm going to attain a better resurrection. I'm going to be raised again with Jesus when he comes back. And that's what I accomplished by faith. I doubt that I'll ever subdue a kingdom. I doubt that I'll ever stop the mouth of a lion, unless I fall in at the zoo or something. But But I am going to obtain a better resurrection, and it's only through faith in Jesus Christ. By faith alone, through grace alone. That's how we get it. And Noah did all that God commanded. He's an amazing titan of faith. Imagine a world where just, and I don't mean the whole world, just the Christians did all that God commanded. How different would this world be today? Okay, I got to move on though. We're up to, why is that little up there? Can you read it? I don't know.
Genesis 7.
Is it?
7.
I mean, it's just weird. I didn't know. Anyway, on slide number 24. So we're up to the rain now. And you could tell by my cartoon last week where the guys were sitting on the front porch forecasting rain. I thought I'd be talking about rain on Sunday, but I didn't make it that far. But anyway, we're talking about rain now. So the flood began about 4,300 years ago, 1656 a.m. That's after man. That's after Adam was created. 1656 later, the world was flooded. That's about 2348 BC, and we believe creation was around 4004 BC. That's just a little timeline. I've got another timeline of the flood, just the year of the flood itself coming up in the slides. Pretty neat slide. Noah was 600 years old. His sons were 100. I didn't realize that until just a couple of days ago. I started putting some math together. I thought, well, wait a minute. Noah didn't have to build this himself. He had 3 sons that were 100 years old. They can build stuff. Get out there and build. I'm tired of you playing video games all the time. Noah and his family and the animals went in, and the Lord shut him in. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but that is pretty significant. I don't know if Noah physically closed the door or if the door miraculous. I don't know, but the point being is the protection of that ark from the storm was God. This was all God protecting Noah and his family inside that ark. He shut them in. Did he shut the door? I don't know, but does it matter? He protected them in the ark. That's what that means. 40 days of rain, the fountains of the deep opened up. Water prevailed for 150 days. That's what the narrative lines out for us. Everything not on the ark died. So was that a regional flood or a global flood? So many people today, so many churches included, will say that it was a regional flood. But look at what this says. The waters prevailed exceedingly. Man, I've got tongue-tied tonight. Upon the earth, and the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. Everything. That's, if there's one thing that all evolution science and all creation science will never believe or agree on, this is certainly one of them, because if we convince the world that there was a global flood, that messes up everything. Now man wasn't created 250 million years ago from a pool of saltwater sludge or whatever it is they say. I don't know. So now the whole world's only, were you going to say something?
Well, teaching on Hopi, I mean, they had almost every religion besides goes to the flood that wiped out their creation and started again.
Yeah, and I've got a slide for that. That's pretty neat. That's a neat discussion too. There is evidence of catastrophic flood on every single continent. I'll talk about that just a little bit more. And how many people were there at the time of the flood? Anybody got a thought? Yeah, worldwide. How many people existed on the planet? I've seen every answer from 125,000 to 3.5 billion. If somebody tries to tell you how many people were around at the time of the flood, smile and wave, boys. Smile and wave. We don't really know. Is it important? Nah, but this part's important. In verse 21, it says all flesh. And in verse 23, it says every living substance. Every substance. It doesn't say every living substance along the Mediterranean, does it? No, it's the whole world. 35 times the word kol appears. That's the Hebrew word for all. 35 times. I'd say all means all. But for it to be judgment on all of mankind and on all of sin, if you just killed the people along the Euphrates with a flood, you really haven't judged anything, have you? If Missouri was all evil all the time and you wipe out Willow Springs, you've not judged Missouri. You've not accomplished much there. Willow Springs is a tiny little place anyway, right? Every society, and this is kind of what you were addressing, practically every civilized society that's ever existed has had a flood story of some sort. These are just a few of the more interesting ones. Gilgamesh was a Mesopotamian king, and the hero of his story was that, right under his name, Utnapishtim. And let me flip my page here. In that story, he's a Babylonian king. In that story, he built a boat, took animals and his family. The flood destroyed all mankind due to wickedness. The boat rested on a mountain. He used a raven and a dove to find, to check for land. Sacrifices were offered, and the hero was blessed. That sound familiar? Yeah. The Great Deucalion was the hero of the Greek mythology story, and in their story, humans disobeyed and had to be destroyed. The hero and his wife was spared. They landed on a mountain, and they sacrificed to God after they left the boat. Chinese, that's kind of an interesting one. After a flood decimated the whole world and the waters raised, he got in his boat, and I don't remember in the story how he got up to the sky from the boat, but he melted multicolored rocks, and he used them to patch the sky so it would quit raining. Sound familiar? Rainbow made out of melted rocks. Did you know that in the Chinese language, ancient Chinese language that is, there's about 40 to 50,000 characters that are little pictographs. Now today it's more letters and less pictographs. About 4% of the language is pictographs. But one of the pictographs that's still in use today is the word, or when you spell the word for large ship, it's 3 symbols, 8, person, and boat in the modern Chinese language today. I thought that was interesting. Nu'u, which is, or Nuwa, that's the one I was just talking about. Nu'u was a Hawaiian king back in, whenever it was. He built an ark. It rained, and as the waters descended, he landed on the mountains of Big Island there in Hawaii, because everything centers around Hawaii, right? And then he sacrificed to the moon as thankfulness. But that wasn't good enough, so the Creator God descended on a rainbow to correct his mistake and tell him, no, you shouldn't be sacrificing to the moon, you should be sacrificing to me. I mean, there's some neat stories out there, and there's so many similarities to the Bible story. And then, of course, the Bible has a story in it, too. There's 3 main theories if you look at what all the scientists today are saying probably happened. Everybody agrees there was some sort of flood, but there's 3 main stories, and I'll try to hit these pretty fast. The freak event on the Euphrates, when the snow-capped mountains melt, the Euphrates swells, and that's the best time to navigate up and down it for trade. So this king loaded up, he built a big boat with barrels on the side and a house on top, and he was a trader of textiles and beers and livestock and a few other things, and he loaded up his boat, and it never rains or storms during this time of year. So he gets on the Euphrates and he's heading down there to trade, and this freak storm washes him out into the Mediterranean where he has no water to drink. The only thing he has to drink is the beer that he's got on board to trade. So the savior of mankind was a beer-swilling pontoon captain in this story. And then the Mediterranean floods the Black Sea. Because of a drought, significant drought in that part of the world, the Black Sea, which is the largest freshwater. I didn't know that was freshwater, did you? Anyway, the largest freshwater lake in the world got so low that, and left a lot of fertile land along where the water, used to be, and they were farming that and all of that. But as the glaciers melted, the Mediterranean flooded over the Arabian Peninsula and filled the Black Sea back up, and everybody had to, leave this area where they were farming and everything. So it flooded just the area around the Black Sea. And all of these expert farmers, metal workers, woodworkers, etc., ranchers took all of their knowledge and populated all over the world, and that's where all the knowledge on how to do everything came from. That's just bizarre. How could you think that's the flood? And then, of course, there's a global flood story, and it goes something like this. The fountains of the deep and the windows of the heaven opened up. Underground or underwater, I should say, there's a whole bunch of volcanoes, and all these volcanoes erupted at the same time as the earthquakes, which opened up the big chasms in the ground. Did you know when a volcano spews out, 90% of it is steam? I didn't know that. Pretty neat. So you have all this turmoil under the water of all these volcanoes erupting at the same time, rain coming down from above, and it's not a springtime rain. It was a massive rain. The entire water that was above the firmament, if you were here on the first night, is now coming down over however much water's up there. It's all got 40 days to get down here. The Pangea broke apart because of all this underground turmoil. You've heard of Continental Drift before? Like the continents drift a centimeter every gajillion years or something like that, according to the scientists. Well, this was continental sprint. These continents are moving around. They're banging off of each other. They're crashing into the underwater mountains. And this is what formed their shapes and the mountain ranges that are on them, the Rocky Mountains, all the different stuff. That's what was going on. And all the shock waves from all of this going on underwater caused all the sea life to flee, and you ended up with sea life living in places where they never lived before, up on the high ground where it used to be mountains and now it's water, because the water prevailed 18 cubits above, or 15 cubits above, I think, the highest mountain. And these waves, because all this is going on, all this turmoil, all this destruction that's going on under the water, causes the water to flow, right? It flows all over the place. It's not just sitting. It's not just like a swimming pool sitting there. And it takes all this sediment from these earthquakes, all this sediment from these volcanoes, from continents crashing into each other, and it flows, and then it, when the conditions are right, it dumps all that sediment into one place. And that's what was going on. And that's where the fossils came from. Do you know what it takes to make a fossil? Anybody have any thoughts on what it takes to make a fossil? So if an animal dies in the pasture in the grass field out there, does it make a fossil? Well, why not? Yeah. So what it takes to make a fossil is an animal dies, and then immediately it's covered up by sediment, right? The sediment's kind of soft, so it forms around it, and then as the sediment cures and hardens and the animal decays away, it leaves a fossil behind. So the only way we would have fossils at every single level all over of the terrain all over the world is if it was all done at one time, right? Sir.
When I was younger, I was a coal miner, and we were there, and they beat down. There were always different stuff.
Yeah, there's fossils in the coal, and there's been some pottery and stuff, and metal working tools and stuff found in coal too, in coal mines. It's fascinating. So after all this water that's trapped in all these places where water shouldn't be, and all of the terrain is completely restructured, it eventually all flows back into these newly formed ocean basins where all the volcanoes opened up. The earthquakes opened up, and the volcanoes blew their tops off, and all that sediment flowed out of there and formed the mountains that we have today. All that water had to flow back into those ocean basins, and then God sent a wind that blew across the land and dried it out. So the water flowed away, and then the wind dried it out. And the destabilization of the whole world, because everything just changed, and all of this volcanic ash just blocking the sun, caused an ice age. That's where the ice age came from. And as this climate and everything settled back down, the ice age went away. In verses, let's see. Maybe I don't have it up there. I guess I thought I did. We'll get to that next. In chapter 6, verse 7, and the Lord said, I will destroy men who I have created from the face of the earth. And I think that screams loud and clear without knowing any of that science we just talked about. It says it right there, or right there, I should say. I printed out here because it's so much easier to read, but it says it came from here, I promise. And that way my notes and my verses are in the same place. But it's so obvious what God says right there in his word of what happened. How can you question that? The only reason you can question that is if you have an agenda to remove God from our society or from the world, the rest of the world, or to make money in science. Some say the rocks don't lie. That's what the scientists will tell you. The Bible, the Christians will tell you the Bible don't lie. I say they both don't lie. And that leads me to this slide right here. So, does anybody know where this is, perchance? It is. It's the Grand. It's not the main thoroughfare of the Grand Canyon, but it is the Grand Canyon, part of the Grand Canyon. And what I want to show you there, what the scientists would have you believe, and I can't spend very much time on this, but it's fascinating to me. What the scientists would have you believe is over billions of years, water flowed through here and deposited all of that and made it look like that. But I've got a question for you. If water was flowing, first of all, if somewhere, it would take a lot of water to carry that much sediment. Where did it come from in that water? And would it look like that if it happened over billions of years? Look how many times the water would have had to change directions. But the most telling, and won't work on the TV, is that layer right there, between that gray line and that where it changes colors right there. So that layer right there, that layer is called the Coconino Sandstone. Anybody ever heard of that? That's a Coconino Sandstone layer, and it stretches from just barely into Canada, just barely into Mexico, and from California to Kansas, covering a full third of the United States. And it's uniform all the way across the country, just like that. And the scientist, I wish I could remember his name, it came from the Is Genesis History documentary I've talked about a few times. He explains it just a little better than me. But what he said is that if you look at how all the layers kind of look like pancakes, he said in order to make one pancake that covers a third of the United States, that's all uniform, whatever the sea level altitude of this layer is here, it's the same in Kansas, and it's the same in California, and it's the same it's one uniform layer. In order to make a pancake that big and that uniform, you kind of got to make it all at one time, right? If you make it over several billion years, it's going to look a little different than that. And that's the science or the evidence that this guy used to point out the fact that as those turbulent waters that's carrying all that sediment from what used to be the seafloor and other places and just deposits it onto the land, covering a third of the United States. And funny thing is that Coconino sand layer is not in just south of the big ditch in Arizona where they have Sedona. I think of it in Sedona, they have a different layer there that's not in the Grand Canyon, and I wish I could remember what it was called, but it's pretty fascinating how he can lay it all out for you. But the evidence is clear that layer covers a third of the United States. It had to be all deposited at one time. So this turbulent water brought in that sediment, and in his estimation, this is his opinion, of course, and most of those layers were laid all within a matter of a few days. You know, it just took a few days to create that layer. Now, after the water recedes, it's kind of like concrete. It's not fully cured yet, right? So the water, when it receded, it left those layers there. All of that would have been flat terrain with a tremendous amount of water somewhere uphill trapped. Massive amounts of water is trapped up there. And after a while, the earthen dam that was holding that water in broke, and in a catastrophic event, all of that water flowed through there at one time, and it carved that canyon over a matter of just 2 or 3 weeks. That's what they claim. And I tend to believe it. Makes significant better sense than it was done over a period of billions of years. I didn't catch that in the movie, or I didn't read that anywhere, but that makes perfect sense too. And another thing is, every single one of those layers in the Grand Canyon, they find fossils in all of them. And if you look, you can't see it in this picture, you have to get a different picture from a different angle. But below all of these levels, you get fossils and all these different levels of sediment. And then you hit a layer of bedrock that's not sediment placed, and there's no fossils in it. That's called the Great Non-Conformity. And it's found on every continent in the world, all over the world, is a bedrock layer where there's no fossils, because it wasn't placed by sediment at the time of the flood. That was the bedrock that was there before the flood. That's where the surface level would have been before the flood. Fascinating stuff. Here's a timeline of the flood itself. On this particular timeline, the model used is a 30-day month. Some people think that the people in those days would have used a 29.5-day lunar month, which would make the timeline vary just a little. And they used whatever technique they used to convert it to our current calendar. So basically, Noah was called into the ark on February 10th. It rained, or 7 days later, it began to rain. So from when it started to rain until the ark rested on a mountain was 150 days, which runs at the same time as the 40 days of rain. It wasn't 40 days and then 150 days, they ran concurrently. And then over a period of 74 days, the water started to decline until the tops of mountains could be seen. And I don't know who was seeing these, because they were shut into an ark. That one baffles my mind. I don't know, but the tops of the mountains could be seen. And then 40 days after that, a raven was released. 7 days later, a dove came back with nothing. 7 days later, a dove came back with an olive leaf. 7 days later, a dove, and he didn't come back. And now we're up to about December 2nd. And it was 85 days after that dove didn't come back before Noah opened the ark and stepped out. That's kind of the basic breakdown. If you use the 29, and the whole thing lasted 370 days, or 1 year and 10 days long. If you use the lunar month, which some people believe is more accurate, it would have been exactly 365 days, which is a neat story, so I kind of like that better. But I couldn't find a timeline that was that easy to read that used the 365-day model, so I used this one, and I presented both options to you. And this won't change the slides. You got to change the clickers. So now that the cruise is over, God instructs Noah to leave the ark. At the point of time that he did that, he was, this is easier, 601 years old. And God tells him for the people and the animals to leave the ark. But he doesn't say anything about taking the food or any other supplies. Maybe it's because he ran out of food and supplies. I don't know. But I have a theory, and I have to tell you, this is my theory, because it doesn't really address. I don't think Noah stepped out of the ark to a barren wasteland and a mud bog. I think it was a little different than that. And you could probably tell by the picture what I think it was. The day that he left the ark was the first day of Nisan. Anybody have any thoughts on what else is going on in that part of the world on the first day of Nisan? It's the first day of the harvest. I don't think that's a coincidence that God had Noah leave the ark on the first day of the harvest. That's when I know it said, the flood said it killed everything, but I think the plant life was reproduced before Noah got off the ark, because otherwise, what would he have eaten? What would he have made clothes and shelter out of? What would he have done anything with? He built a tent. How would he have done that if the ground was just a mud bog with nothing on it? I think that, this is just my opinion, but I think at least in the region where they landed and walked down from the mountain, I think they came down as the harvest was ready to take. Anybody have any thoughts on that, disagreements or agreements, or ever thought of that before?
Well, it could have been like maybe just a super blend. Now the ground is like super fertile
It could be that just the ground was ready to plant. It doesn't say that Noah took seeds with him or anything. You know, that God would have had to refresh the ground for them. And
Well, even if grass dies every year, whenever the seed for the root of the ground is,
that's true too.
obviously with all that time on the ark where it could replenish, that. Oh, yeah.
Now, the olive branch, the bird did bring back an olive leaf, but I saw one scientist at least, or one Bible scholar, I should say, who claims that olive trees will live underwater for a significant amount of time. So maybe the olive tree was not wiped out to begin with, but the Bible says everything. So I don't buy into that theory, but the bird came back with a leaf. If God wiped out everything, and at some point in time he's going to renew everything, maybe he renewed the food for Noah and his family to eat when they stepped off the ark. What are the cows going to eat if there's no grass? They're going to walk around and starve to death, and then there'll be no cows. I don't know. Take it for what it's worth. If you want to research it, you want to discuss it. If you don't want to, I don't know. It's just a theory. I'd like to think God would do that for us when we got off the ark. Genesis 8:20 through 22. And Noah builded an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast and every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And that's another reason why I think perhaps God had provided food for them, because there's not very many animals left in the world, not very much left for Noah to eat. And what does he do? He gets off the boat and he puts them on the altar. That cut his food supply down even more. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor. And the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more every living thing as I have done. While the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. So the very first thing, think about what all Noah's been through. He spent 100 years-ish building a boat. That's not easy work. And then he had to get on there and ride the storm for a whole year. And, all these animals, all this work. What's the first thing that he does? I think this is a beautiful statement about Noah and his faith. The first thing he does. And what's God's reaction to it? He smelled the sweet savor. This was very pleasing to God that Noah provided this offering. What is a burnt offering? That's what Noah offered. It's God's visible presence is not with him anymore. That's been pulled away. And so he builds an altar, and that kind of represents temporarily, or on a small scale, God's presence here with Noah and his family. And they offer clean beasts. What's a clean beast? Well, that's defined in the Bible. I don't know what the list of them are, but a burnt offering is an offering of thanksgiving, and the word used for burnt offering is olah, which means up in smoke. That's all. That's what the Hebrew word means, up in smoke, or going up in smoke. So the offering requires, and there was no definition of this during the time of Noah. This all came in Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy later, whichever book it's in. I don't even know. But it's all lined out for them in there what a burnt offering would be. But it can be offered any time. I think in the temple days, there were 3 times a day. You could come to the temple, purchase an animal, present it to the priest, and he would burn it on the altar. They have to skin the animal, because you don't burn the skin, dump the blood on the altar, and then burn the whole animal until it's completely consumed, and that's a burnt offering. And it's the purpose of it, substitutionary for our sin. Does that sound familiar? That's a precursor to what's coming in the new covenant, right? And it's also an admission of guilt. In Exodus 20, God tells the Israelites to build an altar of earth and offer burnt offerings. There's a lot more verses about it other than just that. And then God speaks to Noah, and he makes his promise to Noah, the Noahic covenant. He makes his promise to them. He's talking to Noah, but he's speaking to all of us. He's speaking to all of mankind from the period of Noah all the way till whenever Jesus comes back. He gives us, and I'm just going to summarize it, he gives us dominion over the animals and plants. That's the first time that's really discussed, isn't it? Or did I miss one in there somewhere? Was it? I don't think eating animals was ever talked about before this, was it? Anybody? No? I didn't think so either. I didn't really research that, but I thought that was the case. And then after that, he says, he tells us not, if you kill a man, and then by man will your blood be required. He tells us not to kill folks. That's really the only command he gives, other than eat animals. And then his promise, let's read that one. That's pretty important. In Genesis chapter 9, 7 through 17. And you be fruitful and multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth, and multiply therein. And God spake unto Noah, and said to his sons with him, saying, And I, behold, establish my covenant with you, and with your seed after you. That's us, right? So this is a covenant with you. And with every living creature that is with you, of the fowl of the cattle, and of the beast of the earth, and with you, and from all that go out of the ark to every beast of the earth, and I will establish my covenant with you. Neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of the flood, neither shall any more be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, This is the token of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. I set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be for a token of a covenant between me and the earth. And it shall come to pass when I bring a cloud over the earth that the bow shall be seen in the clouds, and I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and of the waters shall no more become a flood to destroy all the earth. So God makes us a promise. He says it to Noah, but he makes a promise to all of us. He's never going to do this again. So why are we really different than the people that lived in the pre-flood era? Why was he able to do this? Why could he make this promise? I'm going to try to address that. Let's look, or as I go through this, figure out where my notes start. Sorry. Yeah, right there. I want to try to talk about how the narrative of Noah sheds light on the gospel of Jesus Christ and on the character of God and on the rest of the Bible for that matter. And maybe through that we'll see. I think to understand this the best, we need to start with creation like I did when I started this class. In Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, that's how far back we need to go, I think, to see the point I want to try to make. God promised two seeds. He promised when he said the serpent would bruise the heel of the woman and the woman would crush the head of the serpent. That was a prophecy of two things. That was a prophecy of two lines of seed, and it was a prophecy, and then Jesus would come from one of those lines, and it was a prophecy of the work Jesus Christ would do on the cross in the future. But if you follow that narrative, if you start reading there and you read through, if you didn't know the rest of the story, I was thinking about this as I was driving into church. Maybe if you went to Africa, or you could probably go right here to Willow Springs and find somebody that's never heard the gospel. They don't know any of this story. And you start telling them from the beginning, there's going to be a few times in there where they're going to think, man, it looks like evil won. This is one of those. So God promised two seeds, and then Adam and Eve have two sons, right? They have Cain and they have Abel. There's the good seed and there's the evil seed. But then what happened? Cain kills Abel. So did I say that right? I can never keep those straight in my mind. So Cain kills Abel. The serpent crushed the head of the woman. We just lost. There's no more line of seed. it looks like we've lost the war. I mean, it's the first quarter of the game and we've already lost. There's not another line of seed there. He promised 2 lines of seed, and he promised the good one would win, but the bad one is winning. So, and then after that, Cain moves away, and he establishes his line of seed elsewhere. And if you read through about the second half of chapter 4, you get all of his narrative, and evil is really starting to prevail over the whole earth with Cain and his line of seed. But then God shows us something interesting here. His plan will not be thwarted. Good can always come from bad. What does he do next? He provides Adam and Eve with another son. He provides Seth. And if you look at all the genealogy through all of the Bible, I believe it's in Luke where it connects a couple of different links. You have to go to several different places in the Bible, but you can go from Jesus all the way to Seth, and you can track that line. And we see, oh, okay, well, that's the good line then, Seth. Seth is the one. And as his line started to multiply, people started to walk with God, and some of the evil was starting to be kept at bay. I don't know what happened between then and when God decided to flood, but the evil prevailed all over the whole earth. But we still have the line of good. Seth's line is in the book of, or in the narrative of Noah. It talks about how his generations were perfect, or what I don't remember the exact wording. He was perfect in his generations, and that shows you through that little bottleneck of mankind, when there was only 8 people left on the world, that promised seed that's going to eventually lead to Jesus Christ for us is still kept, it's preserved and kept perfect through that time period. And Jesus is the promised seed of Eve, who not only walks with God, but he overcame death and sin. So just like when Cain killed Abel, if you didn't know the whole story, you would think that evil has prevailed. When Jesus hung on the cross, if you didn't know the whole story, you would think the serpent has crushed the head of the woman, not the woman has crushed the head of the serpent. And the other day I said that the devil thought that he won, and then I corrected myself. No, the devil knew. He knows how this is going to play out in the end. But the people who don't know the whole story, they probably did think. Some of those Roman soldiers probably think they just won. We just won this, In their mind, they're good. The Romans overcame. But it was that very act of that kangaroo court and the mocking and the beating and the nailing to the cross with the crown of thorns, all of this that Jesus went through, that very act was the one, that's what crushed the serpent's head. That's what I'm trying to say. That's the act that crushed the serpent's head. That's already been done. And it was promised to us in Genesis. It was carried through the book of Noah, or the story of Noah, through the line of Noah. That seed was protected. It went through David. It tells us that through all the narrative of Israel, it tells us that it's coming from David. But he won. He hung on the cross. He overcame sin. He defeated death. Such an amazing story. I wish I could explain it a little bit better. In the narrative, God provided one righteous man. He provided Noah, one righteous man. He provided one righteous man to save all of mankind. And then later on, he provided one righteous man to hang on that cross to save all of mankind. And that one righteous man was righteousness himself. And he defeated death and he defeated sin. And he saved us. It's an amazing story. I don't feel like I'm doing a very good job of explaining it, but here's the bottom line. Every person, there's only 8 of them, everybody that walked into that ark and got the door shut behind them was saved. And everybody that approaches the ark and the cross and surrenders their heart to Jesus Christ is saved. Such a beautiful story. Jesus fulfilled the commandment to repopulate the earth with the image of God. You remember when we were talking about the image of God, God's purpose for us was to populate the world with a bunch of little images of God running around, and we messed all that up with sin. But when Jesus came along, you go to he hung on that cross, and when we believe on him and accept that, we are transformed into his image, and it's because of his work on the cross that we are again populating the world with the image of God through Jesus Christ. And I think without the story of Noah and how that was preserved through the flood, it would be, that sheds a lot of light on the gospel is what I'm trying to say. Anybody have any, hey, that worked out pretty good.